In 2013, Injustice Gods Among Us released and took the world by surprise. A reskinned Mortal Kombat with DC characters wasn't a novel concept. Only 5 years earlier, Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe released, placing iconic DC characters in the hands of bloodthirsty players who wanted to see them beat and be beaten in brutally cartoonish ways. While the gameplay of Injustice was fun and an overall improvement from its predecessor, the story that Injustice tells is what made it such a hit at the time, and is still at the center of its legacy. Injustice Gods Among Us captured longtime fans of DC Comics and newcomers alike by taking recognizable characters and twisting them in order to tell a story about the corruption of ideals and the resulting battle between authoritarianism and freedom. The storyline was so interesting that a prequel comic tie-in series that started 3 months before the release of the game continued publication for nearly 4 years with critical acclaim. Injustice was riding high, and with an upcoming sequel, it seemed like this would be a franchise DC could rely on to tell fascinating and unique stories for years to come. Flash forward to today, and the state of Injustice is quite different. Injustice 2 released in 2017 and had even better reviews than the first game, with the praise focused on updated gameplay mechanics and more polished visuals. However, the story of Injustice 2 did not come close to the highs of its predecessor, and as of this recording, nearly 5 years later, there has been no announcement of an Injustice 3. The 2021 Injustice animated movie, remixing the events of the Year 1 comic to tell its own story, has a 37% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, which is a surprise since DC's animated films are something fans have come to rely on for consistent quality. It's clear that the Injustice franchise has fallen far from the prominent position it once held only a few years ago, but why? What happened that made Injustice lose the golden glow people loved, and why does it already feel like a lost property being squeezed for every drop of money it can earn Warner Brothers? I think it all comes down to the horrible storytelling of Injustice 2. Injustice 2 was a game that I did not play upon release. Word of mouth was barely there, and the most exposure I got to it was from a friend addicted to the mobile add-on, which this game really shoves down your throat. The game was on sale a couple weeks ago, so I bought it on a whim, hoping to get some nostalgic joy out of a game universe that I loved from the first entry in the series. I played through Injustice 2 twice. First I played the Batman ending, then I replayed Injustice 1, then I played Injustice 2 again for the Superman ending. In my experience, I can definitively say that the story of Injustice Gods Among Us is far superior to Injustice 2 in every regard, and there are two core factors behind this difference in quality: causality and character. Breaking down these factors will paint a picture of what exactly went wrong with the story of Injustice 2. Cause and effect. This happens, so that happens. All these things happen, which culminates in this one thing happening. Causality is the foundation of story progression, and yet Injustice 2 suffers because of its mishandling of this concept. I think that by looking at a brief summary of both games, this issue already becomes clear. What is Injustice about? It's about how justice can be corrupted within powerful people, pushed past their breaking point, and the horrors that they can inflict on others in their pursuit of their ideals. What is Injustice 2 about? It is about a world rebuilding after overthrowing an authoritarian government that is threatened by a force that requires an alliance between the current world order and those who used to rule that defunct government in order to fight back, and then the battle that happens after that external threat is defeated over the ideals of both sides. I'm keeping these summarizations as loose as possible, trying only to hit the parts absolutely necessary to the storytelling. As you can see, Injustice 2 requires a lot more explanation, but the stories for both games are about the same length. The reason that Injustice is a tighter story than Injustice 2 is because Injustice knows what story it is telling, so it can make room to flesh out its characters and get you to feel emotionally invested. Injustice 2 has no idea what it's about at its core. It has so many story threads, which makes the narrative feel more plot-driven than character-driven. It is a story about story, whereas Injustice 1 is a story about character. You may think that I'm being a little harsh on Injustice 2, and that my summary doesn't do a fair enough job detailing the events of the story. So, to demonstrate how these two games differ in the consequences that they each set up, I want to compare Injustice to Injustice 2 using a similar storytelling element that they share. Both games are framed around newcomers arriving to the Injustice Earth. In the first game, it is the Earth Prime heroes. In the second game, it is Supergirl. It's unfair to compare Supergirl to half the cast of Injustice, so I'll compare her to just Earth Prime Batman. The reason that Prime Batman is a much more effective narrative device is because his inclusion actually changes the characters in the story and drives the plot forward. whereas Supergirl could be taken out of the second game entirely, and not much would change. Injustice begins with the inciting incident that caused a divergence from the standard way DC heroes operate. Years later, we are shown the Earth Prime heroes doing their classic DC hero versus villain battle. A number of them are portaled over to the Injustice universe by the Injustice Batman in order to fight against the regime. Prime Batman arrives with the Joker and is very confused by the world he's in. Later, he tracks the Joker and tries to capture him, but is beaten and captured by Regime Hawkgirl and Yellow Lantern and taken before Regime Superman. Superman recognizes this isn't his Batman and questions why he and the other duplicates are here. This leads to Superman providing Lex Luthor with data so he can make a scanner to identify other duplicates, but after his interaction with Prime Batman, he begins to wonder if it's possible to bring the Prime Universe's version of Lois Lane to this world. In this moment, the story solidifies that the interaction with Prime Batman has caused a dramatic shift in the motivations of the primary antagonist. After this, it's announced Injustice Superman is going to execute Prime Batman, using him as bait to draw out the insurgency. So, the insurgency comes up with a plan that involves an assault on Stryker's Island, the destruction of the Watchtower, and Lex Luthor revolting against Superman. This is all instigated by how the story uses Prime Batman, and all these actions have direct ramifications that ripple throughout the game. When everyone regroups, the Prime Heroes and Injustice Batman argue about whether or not to send the Prime Heroes back home, but Prime Batman comes up with an alternate plan: bring Prime Superman to the Injustice world. Injustice Batman disagrees, but they are interrupted. Later, while the climactic battle is going on, Prime Batman battles Injustice Batman to get him to come around on not accepting fate, and convinces him to transport the Prime Superman here. The entire conclusion of this story is a direct result of Prime Batman's actions in the plot. Now, that was all a ton of cause and effect consequences based on the inclusion of one of the Prime heroes in this story. While he doesn't have a direct impact on every single story beat, you can tell his actions and inclusion have serious ripple effects throughout, even if his existence isn't the heart of the thematic conflict. The story is still about a corrupted Superman trying to enact his version of absolute justice in the world, and an insurgency that fights back against this authoritarianism. Prime Batman, and all the Prime heroes' inclusion in the plot, helps to move that story forward. If we look at how Supergirl was used in Injustice 2, we see a very different implementation. The game begins with Supergirl as a young woman witnessing the destruction of Krypton by the villain Brainiac. She escapes the planet with her cousin Kal-El, but is knocked off course en route to Earth. The next time we see Kara is with Black Adam and Wonder Woman, living and hiding with them, waiting for their opportunity to free Superman from imprisonment. When Brainiac attacks Earth, Kara recognizes his ship and convinces Wonder Woman and Black Adam that they need to rescue Superman ASAP in order to protect the planet. So Supergirl frees Damian Wayne and Cyborg, and then meets Superman for the first time, and they are just like, oh hey, cool. Then she battles Blue Beetle and Firestorm, but there is no clear winner. Batman shows up and is like, who the fuck is this? She tells him, and then he moves on and forms a temporary alliance. We are then told by Superman that Kara told him off-screen that they have 48 hours before Earth is destroyed by Brainiac, which allows for the formulation of a counterattack plan. With nothing to do, Supergirl and Wonder Woman start fighting some Brainiac betas to help civilians until Supergirl is attacked by Cheetah and is saved by Wonder Woman. So far, the only impacts that Supergirl has had on this story is having Wonder Woman and Black Adam try to free Superman a little sooner, and providing some very basic exposition on Brainiac's strategy off-screen. This is when we get to Supergirl's chapter, chapter 9 out of 12. It begins when Harley stops Wonder Woman from killing Cheetah. Wonder Woman then stabs Harley through the gut, and Supergirl saves Harley and beats Wonder Woman up, claiming that executing people without a trial is dishonorable. She then goes to the Fortress of Solitude to confront Superman about Wonder Woman's actions and is dismayed to see that Superman supports Wonder Woman. Supergirl tries to flee, questioning if her cousin could truly have this philosophy, but Damian and Black Adam try and stop her. She calls them out on their bullshit and beats their asses. Finally, she also fights Superman. Afterwards, Brainiac starts stirring shit up, and so they call off their fight and go back to business as usual, with the promise that when this is over, Supergirl will have to choose her side. So, her whole chapter was dedicated to setting up a decision for the future. The heroes all try and destroy Brainiac's ship, but they cannot, and Superman is blasted to Kingdom Come. In the aftermath, Supergirl is distraught that she couldn't protect her cousin and claims that she cannot hear his heartbeat anywhere. Brainiac then dials in and demands Kara so that he can complete his Kryptonian collection, claiming he'll spare Earth if they hand her over. Literally, no one buys that, and they come up with another attack plan. After some magic shenanigans, Batman and Supergirl break into Brainiac's ship, where Kara finds the shrunken cities he's stolen, and then she's captured. From here, Superman just shows up out of nowhere, so I guess Kara sucks at hearing hearts, and he and Batman take Brainiac down, freeing Kara. She shows up and stings Brainiac's back before she is rescued by Batman, who takes Brainiac down again. With Brainiac defeated, the player must choose which side to ally with, Superman or Batman. No matter what you choose, Supergirl sides with Batman. She tries to convince Superman he's doing the wrong thing, but then she leads Superman and Wonder Woman to the Batcave where Batman is waiting. Supergirl is defeated by Superman, and Batman and Superman have their final battle. If you chose Batman, Superman is banished to the Phantom Zone, and Batman talks about reforming the Justice League with Kara. If you chose Superman, he imprisons Kara, uses Brainiac's tech to mind control Batman, and then threatens to use it on Kara if she doesn't join his universal army willingly. The end. While Kara is featured throughout the story, I'd go so far as to say she's the third main character, she doesn't actually have much consequence on how the story unfolds. Even the events of her own chapter don't have any lingering impacts. The most consequential action that Supergirl took throughout the entire game is protecting Batman upon their initial entrance into Brainiac's ship. Her presence doesn't change any characters from how they were at the start to how they are at the end. She doesn't ultimately defeat the big bad, nor does she have any impact on how the story concludes, since no matter what, she is either on the winning or losing side, depending on the player's choice. A simple fix for this would have been to have the player's choice be Kara's choice, but for some reason, even though this was set up, they didn't go through with it. Instead, in both endings of the game, Kara feels like a passive viewer of the story, being washed up in a wave of other people's actions and having no say on her own future. She either forms a new league with Batman or is captured by Superman through no action of her own. Now again, you could say that I'm being unfair to Injustice 2. It's clear that Brainiac's invasion is the main driver of consequences for that story, and dependent on Supergirl is disingenuous. To that, I would say, Injustice Superman is the main driver of the consequences of Injustice 1. His regime serves the same role as Brainiac's invasion. My point with comparing the Prime Earth heroes to Supergirl is to demonstrate the layered storytelling on display in Injustice compared to Injustice 2. Injustice 2 is a game that is primarily driven just by stopping the bad guy, and all these characters are just in their own little story pockets. Injustice is an interconnected web of cause and effect that is propelled forward by actions outside of stop bad guy. The complexity of Injustice's storytelling makes Injustice 2 look amateurish by comparison. Despite the choices that Injustice 2 gives the player, the story feels much more like a simple point A to B story, whereas Injustice took the time to carefully craft repercussions for character actions that kept its story feeling like a dynamic world with stakes to every battle and interaction. That is why, from a story structure perspective, Injustice 2 falls short of where its predecessor excelled. Character is what these games depend on. It's at the heart of the marketing, it's the entire hook for the series. Play as characters you love and watch them beat the crap out of each other. But Injustice took things a step further. It crafted its own story, manipulating your expectations to create brand new versions of these characters that you get to learn more about as the story progresses. While hitting Superman with the Batmobile may have been the initial hook for Injustice, the characters that the series created is what made it so special. At this point, I don't think it will shock you that I think Injustice handled characters infinitely better than its sequel did. The reason for this can be broken down into two categories: character philosophy and character decisions. The entire premise of Injustice Gods Among Us is based on two conflicting philosophies between Regime Superman and Insurgency Batman. There are a lot of intertwining character dynamics that add layers to that relationship, but the core is a battle between authoritarianism and freedom. Superman is corrupted by the events at the start of the game. The Joker, tricking him into killing his pregnant wife and detonating a nuke to destroy the city he loves, understandably broke his brain. He feels that people cannot be allowed to run rampant. He wants to kill criminals on the spot to create fear of instant punishment for wrongdoing in order to dissuade others from committing crimes. This is an extreme philosophy, but it's one that real people can relate to in some part. Could it be beneficial to live in the ultimate police state where no one commits crime and society is at peace? There could be some comfort in that. However, if you look closer and see how that safety is enforced by unelected godlike freaks who dictate their own rules based on their own whims, things start to look less than utopian. Batman resists Superman's regime, knowing the danger an authoritarian government poses, and firmly disagrees with the instant execution of criminals. His resistance isn't built to force some utopian dream on the world. He insists on freedom, while Superman demands safety. Batman accepts that in a free society, there are consequences. People behave unjustly, commit crimes, make mistakes, as people have always done. Before all of this, it was his mission to fight back against crime in order to try and make the world a better place. But he never killed. He never executed even the most extreme criminals, because who is he to decide who lives and who dies? Of course, the hole in Batman's logic, allowing the Joker to live to keep killing, is pointed out a number of times throughout the game, and that is what makes the philosophical conflict so interesting. No one is flat out right, and no one is flat out wrong. We are told by Ares that conflict in this world has all but stopped. The god of war has grown weak in the period of Superman's rule because people actually are killing each other far less. There is peace in the world due to Superman's authoritarian stance. It is a peace enforced by blood, but peace nonetheless. Killing the Joker, something Batman refused to do because of his own extreme views, was the catalyst for Superman's regime. There are a number of examples given as to why Superman's regime is flawed, so I won't bother going into it, but injustice is more than a good guy versus bad guy, I'm right and he's wrong smackdown. It's a nuanced look at two extreme philosophies when it comes to societal ills, and it allows for the characters involved to be both right and wrong at times, showing that there is no perfect solution. Injustice 2, on the other hand, just makes Superman dumb evil. Whereas in Injustice 1, Superman had some redeeming qualities as to why he went down the path that he did, and we witness him becoming more corrupted as the game goes on. In Injustice 2, Superman is just fully evil, constantly scheming to take over the world and enact his regime once again, ending with him going to conquer the known universe. He has no compassion for the ones around him. He doesn't care about Wonder Woman or Kara or Bruce. He's a cold-blooded killer who cannot be reasoned with even by his own flesh and blood. He's been locked away for years and never once reflects on his actions. When Kara confronts Superman, this was a golden opportunity to make his position in this game more nuanced. Instead, he just yells at her that people have been killing each other for thousands of years, so he'll kill them to stop them from killing each other. Horrible pitch, dude. The ultimate confrontation between Batman and Superman in this game comes down to whether or not to kill Brainiac right away. Batman says to hold off because there are a bunch of shrunken cities filled with people that they have no idea how to free. They could use Brainiac in order to save them. Superman says, fuck that. We'll figure it out somehow. Let me kill him now. I mean, the guy is brain dead. The Superman of this game doesn't have a plan outside of murder spree, compared to the Superman of Injustice, who set up an entire intricate government in order to keep peace on a planet that meant so much to him because it's where he met the people he loved. Superman is just the ultimate supervillain in Injustice 2, and Batman is no better. Batman is the most two-dimensional version of himself that there can be. Any tact or nuance with his position have flown out the window, even though he finds himself in a vastly more important position as a leader in this new world. Going back to that Brainiac to be or not to be scene, when Batman steps up to Superman, he's just as hardlined as he's always been. He has had no character growth and barely any intelligence. Batman could have simply said, hey, let's keep Brainiac alive for now so we can save these cities, and then maybe you can execute him for his crimes later. Boom, simple, would have solved everything and been an olive branch to Superman in order to ease tensions. Batman doesn't kill, but this is Injustice Batman, a world leader who's going to have to face the reality that sometimes criminals deserve execution even if he doesn't personally agree with that. He isn't a vigilante anymore. He's a man who is responsible for building a new world, and in that position of power, Batman should have had a character arc where he realizes he needs to do some things that he's morally not okay with. Instead, he's just as hard-headed a baby as Superman is, and we are left with a world that is much more confusing than we started in Injustice. What are the rules of Batman's world? Why does he instantly decide Brainiac cannot be executed? He never suggests that it's up for any governments or people to decide. Does he dictate what rules governments can make? Shouldn't the people of this planet get a say? Is he willing to put it up for a vote? Do universal genocidal nerds have a right to live? Why does Batman get to decide who lives and who dies? There's just as much of a problem with his hardline philosophy as Superman's. Okay, maybe not as much, But still, there's an issue here that the game really could have tackled. Instead, they just make Batman good guy and Superman big meanie, and the game boils down to a fist fight that doesn't matter. The end. The point I'm trying to make is, the characters' philosophical differences were handled with care in the first game, whereas in the second game, they became paper thin and yet more front and center. You couldn't even have a character interact in the second game that didn't boil down to Superman bad, Batman bad. It was a really disappointing turn of events because the first game was such a refreshing look at these two characters, altered by the state of the world, butting heads over their different beliefs. But finally, let's talk about the huge cast of characters in both games and the decisions they make that define them. Injustice: Gods Among Us may have primarily been about a philosophical difference between two heroes and what happens when their alternate reality doubles show up, but at nearly step, it featured characters who made decisions that altered the world around them while changing. There are so many characters in Injustice that have their own arcs. Typically, it is the Injustice universe characters that change due to the actions of the Prime Earth heroes. Deathstroke decides to join the insurgency and helps to fight against the regime. Shazam witnesses Superman murder Lex Luthor, which causes him to stand up to Superman's increasing madness, which in turn causes Superman to murder Shazam, which then causes the Flash to turn against the regime and help the insurgency. Harley's interaction with Joker gets her to see the abuse at the heart of their relationship, and she cuts him loose. Wonder Woman convinces the Amazonians to stand up to the regime. Batman convinces Batman to accept more help than he was willing to, and that is how Prime Superman arrives. The characters make decisions, oftentimes due to their growth, that have a direct impact on the world around them. That is not the case in Injustice 2. Honestly, all of Injustice 2 can be defined by how stagnant every single character is. So much so that we see some of them go through the same arcs they went through in the first game. Once again, Harley confronts the Joker, this time a hallucination, and overcomes her toxic relationship to him. Once again, the Flash has to face the repercussions of his actions in the regime. This time, Hal Jordan joins him, going through a very similar beat. Injustice: Wonder Woman has to deal with the fact that Superman doesn't love her like he did Lois. Again. Damian Wayne and Batman butt heads over their different ideologies. Again. Aquaman, Black Adam, Scarecrow, Gorilla Grodd, Green Arrow, Black Canary, Catwoman, Poison Ivy, Cyborg, etc. are all the same by the end. Even the introduction of Dr. Fate, one of the most powerful DC heroes, is completely pointless and impacts nobody in the story. The one character who has any semblance of a new arc is Supergirl. She goes from wanting to save her cousin to realizing how corrupted he's become and attempting to stop him. It's not super in-depth, but at least it's something. There are no twists, no changes of heart, no shifting alliances or relationships altered by the events of the story. Everyone except for Kara starts by thinking one way and ends by thinking the same way, and that's boring. That's my biggest critique of Injustice 2. It was just so boring. It's a by-the-numbers fighting game that felt like it put far more effort into cosmetic upgrades and a mobile add-on in order to make money off of microtransactions than crafting a well-told story. My issue isn't that the story of Injustice 2 didn't live up to the first game. Sequels are hard to make, and Injustice 1 was special. It would be hard to top. My issue is that it feels like Injustice 2 didn't even try. It's a game without a heart that exists because the first one was a surprise hit and they wanted to capitalize on the name recognition. It's a game that didn't appreciate the goodwill people had for the series and the unlimited possibilities of continuing to tell alternate reality DC stories in a concise fighting game format for a more mainstream audience. Injustice 2 was flat, uninspired, and worst of all, forgettable. It's the perfect example of ignoring everything that worked about the original and making a cash grab sequel, and that really sucks. Injustice 2 doesn't ruin the first game, and if an Injustice 3 did come out, I would be interested to see what they would do. I'm a sucker for DC, and I'm especially a sucker for the stories they tell in their video games. There's just something about video game storytelling that lends itself really well to comic book superheroes, and I'm always willing to give any of them a shot. This video was a bit harsh, but my hope is that I gave you a way to reframe your thinking about this game so you can express your own feelings that may be completely contradictory to mine. To me, it's clear that something went wrong with Injustice 2. I just laid out all the reasons that I can think of, but if you have your own thoughts, please share them below. As fans, our feedback should be valued by the creators of franchises that we love, and instead of screaming into the void, hopefully thought-out messages can break through and maybe make a difference in how creators think about their next projects moving forward. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this.